Chapter 22. The rest of the first week of classes wasn't quite as interesting as my first day. The most exciting part was when my intro to the Amazon teacher announced that sometime in the next few weeks, we would be making a trip to the local science museum, Museo Paraense Emilio Goege. I immediately looked it up. The museum had zoology and geology exhibits, a small zoo, a botanical garden, and a limited archaeology exhibit from what they believed were ancient Yedramora sites on the outer reaches of the rainforest, back before humans forced them to retreat deep into the center of the Amazon. Tiffany had convinced me to go on the boat tour with her the third weekend we were there, but by the end of the first week, I was thoroughly drowning in reading assignments, essays, and a list of foreign words to memorize. By the end of the second week, I despaired ever having any free time to do any sightseeing, and I was forced to opt out of the cruise the day before it left. Disappointed, Tiffany said that she'd also hold off for a week or two, but if I didn't change my mind, she'd go without me. I had practically locked myself in my room over the weekend, so I was completely oblivious to the local gossip running around the college grounds until Tiffany finally dragged me to the cafeteria. Of course, I'd been stopping by regularly to pick up food, but I had just taken it back to my room so I could continue working. Sunday evening, though, my newfound friend insisted we eat with everyone else because I needed to take a break from all my studies. "You're in Brazil!" she exclaimed. "Didn't you always say you wanted to travel? And now you're locking yourself away as if it doesn't mean anything?" I sighed heavily. "I know, but I have so much to do. I probably shouldn't have signed up for so many classes." "Well, either you can drop some," she chuckled at my grimace, "or you can come with me for dinner. I've barely seen you since the first few days we got here." I hung my head. "I'm sorry." She thumped my back. "I get it, lots to do, but right now, we need to get you out of your corner and into the world again." And so I'd ended up sitting in the cafeteria with a pile of food on the platter in front of me, Tiffany chattering away about something or another, while snippets of conversation around me filtered into my consciousness. Say they saw the Yedramora. No way. They'd never come this far. Just stopped working. The boat, or all magic? Unconscious. When we woke up, we were back up the river. "What's going on here?" I asked Tiffany, interrupting her story about whatever had happened earlier that day. What's that?" "Sorry," I said, "but people are saying things. Yedramora? Magic not working?" I was wondering how long it would take you to notice it. I attempted to glare at her, but she shrugged it off. Apparently, the last boat tour that went into the Amazon ran into some odd problems. When they were nearing the end of the Furo Santa Maria, where they were going to turn around, the engine suddenly died. "Geez, we missed a hell of a ride. Didn't you say you wanted to meet the Yedramora? That was probably your only chance." She chuckled. "Are they Magicus engines or Magitech?" I asked, ignoring her last comments. "Magitech, obviously." "So, couldn't it just be that they got too deep into the jungle and that the technology part just stopped working?" "Aside from the fact that they've been doing this tour for years with the same boats and haven't had any issues until now?" She looked at me skeptically. "I'd say that's probably not the issue." "What then?" "Well, you overheard the others correctly. Magic stopped working. Not just the boat. All magic. Nobody could use their talents. No Magitech or Magicus tech worked. It was like some kind of dead zone." I frowned. "How? Why? Has it ever happened before?" "Well," Tiffany said slowly, "there are rumors. Someone's friend's sister's boyfriend kind of rumors. They say it's happened in past tours, off and on over the years, and that it's just been covered up, students sworn to secrecy. Other people say that the boat went further than it was supposed to go, and the Yedramora have some kind of magic-canceling device to prevent people from traveling too far into the Amazon. Still others say," I cut her off, laughing, "sounds like conspiracy theories now." She smiled. "I know, right? Honestly, nobody has any idea what happened or why, so people are just coming up with whatever ideas they can try to explain it. And if anybody does know why, they're keeping it very well secret. The administration has only said they're canceling further tours until the boats have all been safety checked. They want to sell us on the idea that it happened because of the unreliability of any tech to function properly at any given time. And the loss of magic? Same thing. Nothing can be guaranteed to work out here or not. Sounds like a smokescreen, I said, and took a bite of food, chewing thoughtfully. Do you think they'll start up the tours again? I really do want to go on one of those boat rides. You think you'll have time? She teased me. I laughed. I'm sure you'll find the time for me. She laughed too, and our conversation turned to lighter topics. But in the back of my mind, I was going over all the limited number of facts I'd just learned and wondered if there was some explanation of it in one of the books in the library. I considered spending some time looking around, then thought about how much schoolwork I had to do and internally grimaced. I had no time to work on a mystery that other, more knowledgeable minds were apt to already be looking into. Rivers seemed to be a recurring theme in my life at that time, as my South American Lit class had also continued it with mythologies of water creatures and places. After Yara, we'd had to look up Bodo, which turned out to be the local name of a pink dolphin that lived in the Amazon River and would turn into a man at night to impregnate women. And if you ever went swimming alone, you might be caught by a boto and taken to Encanche, which happened to be our third topic of research. Colloquially, Encanche means enchanted in Portuguese, and the Encanche that the magic shape-shifting pink river dolphins take people to is a magical underwater paradise city where the abducted almost never return from unless they were shamans, or priests, or magi, depending on the translation. We'd been given a full week to write our paper on both the topics of Boto and Encanche, which I turned in at the beginning of class the Monday after the boating incident. Today, you have a choice, our teacher announced once the 11 of us still in class were seated. For unknown reasons, someone had dropped the class after the second week. I suspected too much workload, as I had already considered dropping some class or another several times in the last week when I felt too overwhelmed with homework. I just thanked whoever was listening that I hadn't thrown a math class in the mix. Take out your lists, the teacher told us, though most of us already had them on the table in front of us. The next word on the list was inti. Today, we move from the water to the heaven, and you have your choice of which story you want to research. If you are tired of Brazilian mythology, look up Inti. If you want a challenge, look up the one after that, Kadisuru. You have 20 minutes to find something. And then, as usual, he left. We never figured out exactly where he went, but most of us agreed that it was probably to his office to start reading papers. He would always return promptly when he said he would, which was usually 15 or 20 minutes after he dismissed us to start our searches. There was a low murmuring as several of my classmates grouped up. After 4 classes of discussions and teamwork, and with such a small number of people, many had made friends and study buddies. I, myself, hadn't gone out of my way to make friends with anyone in particular, since I didn't have the time to spend with them outside of class. My kiosk search spit out several book names for the word Inti, which turned out to be the Incan sun god. Kadisuru, on the other hand, had a total of 2 results. He wasn't kidding that it would be a challenge, I mumbled to myself as I wrote down the information for the 2 books below the ones for Inti that I'd chosen. I figured I'd decide which one to pick after I learned more about each. I was mildly disappointed when I went to look for the Kadisuru books, only to find them gone from the shelf. Sighing, I located the Inti stories and went back to the classroom. 2 other students were already there, a girl whose name I unsurprisingly didn't remember, and Christoph. Looking at the title of the book on the table in front of him as I passed by, I saw it was the Kadisuru book I had been unable to get myself. I assumed the other one he was reading was the other book. I hesitated a moment before speaking up. Hi, I said quietly. He glanced up at me momentarily but didn't respond. I continued anyway. You have the books on Kadisuru? He looked at me again. Yeah, so? I was wondering if I could look at them when you're done. He watched me for a moment. Why? I blinked in surprise. Because I want to decide if I should go with that one or Inti. Go with the Incas, he told me and turned back to the book. I'm sorry, I said hotly, my anger rising. I tried my best not to let it out. I think that's for me to decide, not you. You don't have the books. I do. So sure, you can decide, but you'll have to find your story somewhere else. I dropped the books I was holding on the table with a loud thump. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the girl look over at me in surprise, but I didn't give it any thought. "I don't see your name written on them." My voice was louder now. "So unless you already checked them out, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't share. I might not even want to go with Katasuru, but I certainly have the right to see for myself." He still didn't look up at me. "I'm planning on checking them out." I stood there fuming for a moment. I wasn't sure what else I could say. Asking hadn't gotten me anywhere, and neither had reason. "Why are you always such a jackass?" I blurted out. "Because I can be." "You don't want people to like you? Because you're sure doing a good job at it." "Why should I care what they think of me? I don't like most of them anyway." "That's a lousy way to live. You must love being miserable." I picked up my books again and stormed to the other end of the table.
"He's always like that," the girl whispered to me in a Slavic accent. "I tried talking to him before. He was just as rude to me, too."
"Oh, I know," I assured her. "I met him at one of the transports on the way here. He was with a group of other people. I can't imagine how they put up with him." She chuckled.
"Maybe they all hate each other, but just hang out together because they can't find anyone else to be friends with."
"Nah, a couple of the gals in the group were pretty cool, actually. Totally opposite of that guy." I nodded my head in Khrushchev's direction. The girl smiled at me and went back to her reading. I cracked open a book and began flipping through the pages. It was about the Inca pantheon and gave a basic overview of all the major gods and goddesses of their religion. The other book I'd chosen was a collection of creation stories, including that of the Incas. I almost fell out of my chair in surprise when, 10 minutes later, 2 books were dropped on the table in front of me. I looked up quickly to see Khrushchev standing over me. "You can have them," he muttered. "They're worthless. Don't say anything actually important. I'm gonna find something better later." He walked back to his seat without waiting for a response and, sitting down, pulled a paper notebook and pencil out of his bag and began writing. I stared at the 2 books for a moment, then looked up to see the girl watching me. She grinned.
"Well, that's one way to get them, I guess."
"I suppose, but if they're worthless, does it matter?" She shrugged.
"Maybe he thinks they're worthless, but maybe they're not. He probably thinks everything is worthless."
I chuckled. "Well, at least I'll be able to find out what Katasuru is, anyway." The girl nodded.
"I've already got enough going on. I'm just going to stick with the Incas. Much easier to find information on."
"I hear you," I mumbled. I knew I should stick with something easy, given how much work I had in other classes to deal with, but my curiosity had piqued, and I wanted to at least know what I was going to miss out on. I set aside my creation stories and took one of the 2 Khrushchev had just left for me. It was an archaeology book. Katasuru, it turned out, was the name of a god from the Amazon tribes. Not much was known about him. They'd found mention of him in a manuscript some archaeologists had found preserved in a sealed jar in some ruins. He'd been a god of justice, or maybe revenge, or possibly hunting. The manuscript had been written in a language not very well understood. The second book didn't have much more information. A couple of explorers had gotten lost in the Amazon several decades earlier and had somehow managed to make it out alive. They claimed they did it by never drawing weapons or harming animals or plants, and were led out by following distant lights through the trees. They swore it was the Yedra Mora, who had at least illuminate talents like the rest of us. But while they were lost, they'd found a temple dedicated to a god of jaguars, based on the statues and carvings in it, and a copy they'd made of some text written inside had later confirmed it as a temple of Katasuru. The text also mentioned the name Kimimana, having to do with something related to duende, the Portuguese word for elves or pixies, but didn't say how it was related to Katasuru. So Katasuru was probably an Amazon god of jaguars and hunting. Any more information would have to be found from alternate sources. I looked at the 2 books that mentioned Katasuru, then at the dozen or so on Inti spread out around the rest of the table, shared among the 8 other people who had returned sometime earlier. Khrushchev was still sitting at his end alone, writing. It would be so easy to just go with the well-known lore and call it good, but something was nagging at me about Katasuru's story. Later that afternoon, I finally realized what had been bothering me. The books may have been short on information, but they weren't completely worthless. I could potentially write a paper on the history of the discovery of Katasuru and the Yedra Mora pantheon, though it probably wouldn't get me as many points as if I learned more about the god himself. But the way Christoph had talked about the books made it sound like he knew more than what had been written, which made me curious. Who exactly was the god Kadisuru, and why had the teacher included such an obscure topic on his list? And how did Christoph already know more about him than the rest of us?